Morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Matthew Huweiler. I work for Comcast. I lead our cyber threat intelligence team, our digital forensics team, and a tabletop exercise program.
And good morning, everyone. Jason Mack. I lead our threat detection, hunting, purple team, and SIM ops teams. And together, we're going to walk you through some of the how we run our hunting and detection programs, along with our intelligence programs at Comcast at our scale, and also a little bit about how we fuse these three programs together and really use intelligence to drive hunting and detection. And we think, use that pretty effectively to find threat actor activity and really drive down risk at the end of the day. So, who we are, who Comcast is, that's actually our headquarters there on the left. For those who don't know, super large cable company, largest ISP in the United States, actually, but also really a global media and tech company. We provide video, internet, home security, all kinds of other services to both residential and business customers. We also make all the software and hardware that supports our services. So, and we do that not just for our own customers, but we do that for a lot of other major telcos too, and not a lot of people realize that. So, if you're in many cases, if you're another cable company customer, you may be using some of our software, hardware, et cetera. The three major divisions, we have obviously our big cable company, but we're also the parent company of NBC Universal, so think movies, TV shows, theme parks, and Sky Group across the pond in the UK, Italy, and Germany that has also a bunch of entertainment assets, satellite networks, et cetera. So that's who we are at a high level. So, as you can imagine, we're really big. And I won't go into this whole slide, we'll be here all day, but I think the stats that are particularly meaningful here are going to be the ones in the top left and the bottom right. There's a lot of workforce identities, network devices, application logs, and all these feed into a large data lake that we have that is 10 petabytes and growing all the time. And this is what really supports our ability to conduct intelligence hunting and detection at our scale.
Thanks, Jason. So now we've discussed our scale and the size of it. Let's dive into how we do threat intelligence at Comcast collection for this scale. So threat intelligence process at Comcast, we broke it into three distinct areas. We have collection, our triage, and our analysis. Collection, it's driven exclusively by the needs of our business units, our customers and stakeholders. Core customers for this, though, and for the purpose of this discussion today, is our threat hunting team, our threat detection team, our incident response team, and our forensics teams. For triage, cyber threat intelligence can be akin to drinking a fire hose, particularly at the scale that we're at. So even if you have a strong and well-organized collection plan, you need to have a way to triage that data to ensure you are actioning the most pertinent and valuable data possible. And that's through our proper triage. Oops. Damn. Can we move slide back? Sorry. The final part, analysis. Intelligence is only as valuable as the way in which it's compiled, disseminated, and provided to your customers and stakeholders. So let's go ahead and dive a little deeper into each of these areas. So phase one, our collection phase. There's three key components to our effective intelligence collection. First is our requirements system, or our priority framework. This helps keep our collection organized and provides a way to unify intelligence requirements across the many business units that we have to support. makes onboarding our internal customers more effective, easier, less painful for them. Second is taking the time to fully understand the needs of our customers and our stakeholders, both internally and externally, and what their requirements are. It's essential to ensure that what you're putting out is the most actionable and pertinent data for them. The third is the maintenance of a continuous feedback loop. We provide regular feedback or receive regular feedback from our customers and stakeholders, which allows us to further fine-tune our collection metrics and methodologies to ensure that we're continually providing that high level of service. we have an additional component highlighted here, our framework. Our framework is broken out into TAPIs, SOAPIs, and COPIs, or threat actors of priority interest, software of priority interest, and keywords of priority interest. For the purpose of today's discussion, focusing around our threat hunt and detection support, we'll be focusing on our threat actors. Primary customers for this particular category is our threat hunting and threat detection team. It's comprised of groups that are known to target the telecom industry as well as other relevant industry or other threat actors of interest to us. We are focused in this category on the campaigns, the tools, TTPs, to help better inform our threat hunters as well as our detection engineers. Phase 2, triage. As I said before, even with a great collection program and methodology set up, it can be like drinking from a fire hose. So how do we handle the volume of data that we are collecting? It's through a proper triage team. We maintain a separate and dedicated team that reviews all incoming automated alerts, reporting and research, further refines it, and transitions it to our senior analysts for further dissemination and action. Our final phase, analysis and dissemination. This is where the ingestion of our reporting and data from our triage team, as I said before, is further refined, put into our standardized reporting formats, analyzed, and actioned. It's here that we vet our IOCs, TTPs, and other pertinent information to make sure that they're highly actionable, effective, and still fresh. At this point, we also add into our threat intelligence platform all this data and coordinate with our stakeholders and customers prior to the dissemination phase to ensure that what we are about to provide them is the most actionable and pertinent. The second stage of this final phase is our dissemination. To accomplish this, we have two platforms that we utilize. We utilize the threat intelligence platform to allow for aggregation and automation and better threat intelligence enrichment. The second is a homegrown product that we call Citadel. Citadel is a centralized repository for all of our reporting, both present and historical. Has records going back 2 years. It's searchable by by any keyword, any threat actor. All of our reporting is correlated in there, allowing teams like Jason's to go back at any point in time to review. So, on that note, all intelligence must be actionable. And this is especially true for a team like Jason's. His team is far too busy to be bothered with receiving intelligence data that is not actionable. So with that, I'll pass to Jason.
Yeah, and with not actioning data, not actioning intelligence, it's just a data feed, right? It's not, we're not doing anything with it, so why are you collecting it? Why are you grabbing it, right? So that's really what this comes down to. So let's talk a bit about why we think intelligence should inform our hunt and detect programs. Well, first of all, a wise CISO once told me you can't control your threats. But you can control your responses and attack surface. So although my stress levels would probably be a lot lower if I did, threat actors will not stop coming for me just because I asked them to. So unfortunately, I don't control that. But we can determine how we respond to threats, and we can certainly harden our attack surface, think vulnerability management, et cetera. Limited resources, right? I'm sure very few, if anyone in here, has everyone they need and every tool they need and every solution they need. So with limited resources, you apply it to the threats that matter, so TAPI, for example, and then you hunt and detect based on that. And of course, we know that hunt and detect are the primary ways in which we can action intel and get them over to IR. And we'll actually talk about that here right now. So, this visual, this is kind of how we look at threat hunting versus threat detection in our environment. And I've seen hunting and detection called different things in different environments. So I want to kind of give a perspective of how we look at this in Comcast. We loosely refer to this as the hunting and detection prism in that they're kind of complementary, but they all lead essentially to the same goal, which is find evil and then respond to that in incident response. And you can kind of see where they're complementary and where they differ, right? So from a threat hunt perspective, that's going to be high data volume, right? You're looking in broad logs for adversary activity, where threat detection's lower data volume. Threat hunt, lower confidence malicious intent, disorganized data, and manual review to identify incidents. So the goal here with threat hunting is you're basically looking in logging to identify malicious activity, and you're not really building high fidelity alerts, but you're really manually looking for signs of adversary activity. And whereas in threat detection, your data volume is lower, you have a higher confidence there's malicious intent, the data is organized, and then the goal is that high efficacy alert. So both of these will result in incidents, right? But the ideal goal here should be move as many hunts as possible into detections, right? Because once you get pretty mature in the hunting world, you can then start to say, okay, so I've conducted this hunt. It is very unlikely this sort of activity will be seen in my environment, and therefore I can create a high efficacy detection, move that to threat detection, and I never have to do that hunt again, and it will now always be available as an automation for my incident response team. So that's kind of how we look at this as a hunt versus detect. Digging a little bit deeper into specifically the threat hunt program in general. So first of all, looking at it just as a process standpoint. So starts out with prioritization, and we'll mention this a couple more times, mention that in Intel. Everything we do is driven by prioritization, right? Like, unless you have, again, everything you need, right? You're always prioritizing against all your other threats, everything else in backlog, et cetera. So we say, all right, so we've got, of all the hunts we have, of all the hunt candidates we have that we're looking at today, what are we hunting on first? Then it's a design phase, right? And for this, we largely follow like the scientific method. So it's really figure out, like, I'm looking for a specific indication of this bad behavior. So think like an adversary TTP in a very specific location. So at our scale, saying that I'm going to look for, signs of, I'm making this up, like APT28 in the network is not a very actionable hunt. Saying I'm going to look for signs of Windows RDP lateral movement, and I'm going to look for it in event logs within this server group, much more actionable. And that's essentially how you want to scope a hunt tight enough that you're actually able to execute it in a reasonable amount of time. Then you have your hunt execution, do the hunt. Validation, this is especially key. Because in hunt, you are inherently somewhat trying to prove a negative, right? You're basically conducting a hunt saying that, well, I think an incident may have happened, but it hasn't been detected via my normal methodology. So how do you do that? Well, every hunt here comes with a free red team, a limited red team. So basically, what we want to do is we want to go and simulate that hunt activity that we're doing, and make sure that, for lack of a better term, the hunters see themselves. And if the hunters see themselves and they haven't found other activity, cool. The hunt was successful, go report on it. If they haven't found themselves, one of two things is possible. Either the hunt logic is an issue, or there's a logging gap, which is also something that can come out of hunts and provide really good value. And then finally, reporting. This is especially key in hunts because we found at least that it can be very valuable to be able to say, yeah, when this thing in the news happens or whatever, yes, we conducted this hunt, we did it several months ago, and we found this, or just in general to be able to present this to executives. I won't go into all these good, better, bests, but just some things to think about for hunting. I think one thing of interest for this one in particular is the ability to really work as a group to validate and go over hunt results and hunt processes. Even if you don't have a large hunting team, this is something you can do in concert, like with your IR team, red team, et cetera, whoever, defenders in general. This is a good exercise. Okay, so that's hunt. Moving on to threat detection. So the process you'll see is somewhat similar, and that's because, as we saw on the slide a couple back, these are complementary processes. So again, we start with prioritization, right? Because, again, what's the most important based on driven by Intel. Then we develop the threat detection signature. Documentation super important here, right? It's not very helpful to build a threat detection signature if you don't have a really good explanation of what does it do, where could there be false positives, maybe even some basic, how should your SOC react to it first. Validation. There's a few different levels of validation here. In a perfect world, make sure the thing fires before it goes live. In some cases, that can be challenging depending on your alert. At a very minimum, occasional red teams, purple teams, et cetera, are good ways to check this. And then maintenance. This is really, really big in detection, right? Like, you don't want to just set up an alert at detection and then forget about it. So tuning, both proactive and SOC requested, are important, right? We tend to meet with our partners in the incident response and SOC teams literally several times a week to say, what are you seeing, anything we need to respond to. And then we obviously have our own, data sources as well to determine if it's time to tune things. And then a couple of things I would point out in the good, better, best for this one. Onboarding of tool alerts. Onboard relevant tool alerts. Obviously, we all have, loads and loads of security tools that would just love to give us every alert known, possible. You got to pick out the ones that are relevant to your environment, or you're going to get alert fatigue in the SOC, and we've certainly had that problem before. So that can be a challenge because sometimes you risk leaving some on the floor, but we've always found it's better to have 10 high fidelity alerts than 100 really voluminous ones that have tons of false positives. And then the other thing I'd kind of pick out of this, just in the interest of time, would be retirement process. And this is very, very key for something like an intelligence-driven program. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in a case study in a few minutes. But when you are dealing with, especially, kind of real-time adversary TTPs, although adversaries tend to share, right? There are things that, will never get old, but there are certain things that age out. Right, and you don't want to have the same thing a year from now if it's literally not being used. So you want to be able to try to keep that fresh and retire detections and content that isn't of current value. So that's our threat detection program. So covering some examples here, and we kind of look at what's a good fit for threat hunting and what is a good fit for threat detection. So, so if you look at threat hunting, so first of all, starting out with what is a good fit for threat hunting, absolutely not IOCs or signatures, at least in our view. So that is not something that hunting should be doing. We think hunting is better off looking for adversary behavior that could go either way. Because remember, as we said, right, they're looking in logs for signs of malicious activity, looking for anomalous behavior, et cetera. So, some examples here. Process launches for LOL bins, living off the LAN binaries. This is really difficult. And the only way you're going to be able to identify this is by doing this and comparing this to, activities of basically other users. Like, you basically have to do essentially normalization analysis of this to get this right. CNC using common internet protocols, malicious use of sysadmin tooling, changes in cloud counter instance config. These are things that you need to look at it from a much broader perspective to say that, and especially in technology organizations, and we do have thousands of technologists at Comcast, because as mentioned, we do our own software, we do our own hardware, et cetera. You have technologists that like to have their own way of doing things. And you'll run into a situation where they're basically looking like threat actors, but they're not actually threat actors. So that's kind of where hunting really has to go figure out what is the difference, what is actually happening here. In threat detection, though, you try to make it a little bit more firm and a little bit easier to understand. So IOC's very good candidate for threat detection. Behavioral signatures, your Yara, Suricata, et cetera. I would add tool alerts here, as long as, again, well-tuned tool alerts, and very obvious adversary behavior. So think, admin tools executing from atypical locations. There's not really a valid reason that you should see crypto mining DNS hits. Local admin creation where it shouldn't be. Things that there aren't going to be a lot of false positives, and that's really the good fit for threat detection. And what I have in the middle I think holds true, and this is really right anywhere in security. Many could be either. So it like most things, it's gray, right? So a good triage process is pretty helpful here. Okay.
All right. So let's dive into a case study. This was, what, Jason, a year ago?
Yeah, something like that.
About a year ago. Jason's team came to my team, my intelligence team, and said, hey, we want to do a threat hunt and threat detection exercise involving the Lapsus group. So how do we work with them on this? So our intelligence process falls into play here. So I'm sure everyone in this room is familiar with Lapsus, who Lapsus is, but just a couple of quick key points. First observed middle of 2021. They're an extortion cybercrime actor. Their targeted industries are fairly wide, but the focus is upon retail, government technology, media, telecom, and computer gaming. They're tracked under several monikers: Slippery Spider, Lapsus, with various spellings, Lapsus Group. And their notable intrusion activity has been seen at companies such as Microsoft, Okta, and NVIDIA. So, like I said, Jason's threat hunters came to me and said, hey, we want to do a hunt on this. So that brings us to our first point, prioritization. Generally, anything that comes directly from our threat hunt teams or detection teams is given a high priority, which then moved us into a research and collection phase. Again, this goes back to our priority of interest framework, primarily with our threat actors of priority interest. We named Lapsus as one and dove into them and collected all the relevant data for Jason's team to help them. We then took all that relevant data and in our analysis phase, trimmed it down, took it down to only the most pertinent of data, did not give Jason any IOCs for his hunt.
They do give me IOCs for detection though, so
yes.
they do, again, you can have both.
And then assembled it into final reporting, which was then published, one, through Citadel, like I described before, our customized repository, and then the IOCs and other pertinent data uploaded into our tip simultaneously. And then we disseminated it to Jason's team, provided it, and asked for any feedback if there were any enhancements or adjustments that needed to be made. Jason?
So now my team has to go to work because now we have to action all this great work they did in research and collection, or else they've done all this work for nothing and it hurts their feelings. So, conducting the hunt and building the detection. So, we started with the hunt because we did our review of it and said that, well, they're probably, it was broad enough that it wasn't enough quite yet to build detections. So, prioritized against other hunts, right? Because, again, we have a lot of hunt candidates and actually intelligence, we have, business needs. Our hunt backlog is big, so prioritize against everything else. And we find, all right, we need to look for DC Sync and AD Explorer abuse. Those are known TTPs for Lapsus. So design a hunt for that, figure out where we're going to look for it, and figure out specifically which logs, which tool's going to provide that, and which logs are going to show us that. So identify that. Cool. Windows security logs, got it. We'll target them, and we'll see if they're there. We're doing the hunt. We don't find anything. Well, that's good. That means Lapsus isn't in the environment, so that means we're not going to spend the next 2 weeks, 2 weeks to God knows how long running incident response. So high fives all around. Except we do need to figure out that we do need to determine that our hunt logic is sound. So Now we have to go actually run DC Sync and AD Explorer and pretend we're Lapsus and make sure that that logic was sound. We do that, turns out, yep, it's good, we found it. We actually then, in addition to that, thought about it and said, you know what? Not a lot of real good reasons that anyone should be running DC Sync and AD Explorer. These are common, AD type tools, and apart from like admins, there really isn't a real valid reason even for like developers and technologists to be doing this. So TDE stands for Threat Detection Engineering, by the way. So send this over to the other side of my team to threat detection and say, hey, I got something for you, so I don't have to ever do this hunt again, and Lapsus is a threat group we might be concerned about. Go build a detection, please. So, detection engineering's turn. So we'll prioritize it higher because A, it's intelligence related, and B, it's kind of being handed to me from hunting, sort of on a silver platter there. So they will review the recent hunt results and then look at building the detections based on that. Still tweaking it a bit and making sure that it works well for our environment. Create response runbooks. So, obviously this goes to the documentation I talked about. So creating, any known false positive conditions, knowing what to do if it fires, etc. Confirm the alert's trigger. So, like I said, we want to really try when possible to avoid assuming that just because we promote a new threat detection signature to production, that it's good to go. So do what we can to make sure that alert actually triggers. And then maintain that alert. So actually, you want to speak to this a bit about,
So obviously, Jason's walked us through his entire process here, both from a hunting and detection perspective, but the work is never done there. Like he said before, you can't just let these detections sit there without making adjustments, tweaking them, and that's where the intelligence cycle comes back into play. His team will routinely reach out and say, hey, do you have any refreshed TTPs, any new data on Lapsus that we could look at? And what my team will do is take our reporting that we previously provided to them, append it with additional data that's able to be discovered at that point in time, and we'll regularly continue this feedback loop for about 2 months.
Yeah, at least.
And then it's an on-demand cycle at that point.
Really, as long as we think the Lapsus group is a threat actor that we are concerned with. And then, we will tune the detections as needed. We'll create new detections if needed, or create new hunts. We actually did another hunt for this as well. It's not reflected in this, but based on and that really is how we keep the intelligence and detection processes jointly aligned from there. So we'll leave you with a couple of key takeaways.
Yeah. So from an intelligence perspective, in your programs, it's essential to have a creation of a priority framework. This will help you filter through the noise, get to the points that are most meaningful for you and your companies or your organizations. Second is absolutely, both in the Intel program, in Jason's programs, have to have a robust feedback program, whether it's regular surveying of your customers and stakeholders, asking for feedback on your reporting. As a matter of fact, that Citadel reporting system in and of itself has people can rate us 1 through 5 stars on reports that we've issued and provide direct commentary and feedback on them as well.
Yeah, and one thing I would also add on the feedback. So I mentioned earlier, we meet hand in hand with our SOC frequently. We've actually even implemented a triage process, even in some cases within Intel, yes, when we get results from them for a feedback process, because it can be challenging sometimes to say, well, because it's gray, right? Yep. As I said, do some things live in detection? Do some things live in hunt? So what we will frequently do is actually meet with the intelligence analyst that has the intel and say, okay, we think this is a good hunt candidate, we think this is a good detection candidate, and here is why. And then that helps them to
further refine it.
Yeah, to greatly improve their intelligence collection capabilities, and helps them think like a detection engineer or a hunter. Kind of the same way that I want my detection engineers, who are the last step before it hits the SOC, to always be thinking like an IR analyst. Right, so that they're always thinking about the person that's going to get the call at 2 o'clock in the morning, and if they get a call with a bunch of false positives, they're going to be pretty unhappy. So I obviously want my detection engineers to think like them too. And then just a couple more items. I think we've gone on and on about this, but obviously validation is key for everything, right? Assume nothing. And then I think this really goes everywhere, not just here, but probably anything in a security program, right? But good reporting is critical. We do executive and tech reports for hunts. We do metrics reporting all the time for detections to show it. We actually map it to MITRE ATT&CK to show where we're gapped, et cetera. And that really helps to maintain program support from our leadership. And at the end of the day, right, increase our budgets and show where where we might be able to grow. So with that, I think we have about 14 minutes for questions.
Great presentation. A couple quick questions on the Lapsus case study, just out of curiosity, how you came to choose Windows security logs as your primary data source, and whether or not you felt also EDR data could provide that telemetry visibility. And then I'm curious, also how much time back, historical data were you able to kind of go back through, and what you felt was sufficient from a historical data perspective to effectively perform that hunt?
So I'll answer the first one. The second one I'll sort of answer, but I don't want to actually give up our retention policy, obviously, in in a public environment. The short answer is we go to where we think the data is best collected. So yeah, there's EDR telemetry, obviously, that has that data as well. I think I'm kind of reflecting back. That was some time ago. I believe we did look in there as well. So the reality is a significant portion of our hunts are actually done with EDR telemetry. Probably, so that's extremely valuable to us. We basically just do an assessment of what's in our lake and look for where the data is, and then we go where the data is. And if the data is not there, we then go to the logging people and say, hey, I don't have this data. And there's tracking mechanisms we have for that to say, hey, we did not do this hunt because we do not have this data. That is problematic. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to fix it in a day, right? There's, there could be technical issues, there could be budget issues, et cetera. But the key is to make sure that that sort of stuff is documented. In terms of how far we went back, let's just say as far as we needed to go back given the threat information we had.
In your presentation, you didn't mention MITRE ATT&CK, and I have some assumptions of where you used it and the details of how you used it, but if you could give us some details, that'd be helpful.
Do you want to? Okay. So I think I mentioned it really, really quick at the end in detection engineering, but we use it pretty heavily. So all of our hunts are mapped to a MITRE ATT&CK TTP. All of our detections are. All of our detections are also mapped. We essentially have a MITRE ATT&CK navigator that we map all of our log sources and all of our detection sources to. So obviously the goal, right, is to always, have that aligned to there. We've started to implement it further in our threat intel. Yep. Yeah. So we're kind of on that journey now to have, essentially in a perfect world, right, you have, TAPI to log source to detection, and then you hunt against that too. That's sort of our journey that we're trying to get to now. Yep.
Thank you. This was a really good talk. You mentioned you've got a TIP and you've got Citadel, and that your hunters and everyone has access to Citadel. Who do they also have access to the TIP?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And I was just kind of wondering, how do you make that delineation? Who also has access to what, and are there any lines on where they are, and why did you set it that way?
So in our company, our org lands within a broader cybersecurity organization. The TIP is more restrictive, and that's accessible only to operational teams that have a need for that data. Citadel is a little broader. Because it's a centralized, it's reporting, essentially. There's no actual data, sensitive data in that.
Hi. Quick question. When you decided to hunt for activity from lapsus, what led you to hunt for TTPs such as usage of DC Sync and AD Explorer rather than something further left on the MITRE ATT&CK framework towards initial access? So for example, MFA, push notification fatigue. How come you would decided to look for something further along in the attack lifecycle rather than something closer to initial access?
So when you're conducting hunts, especially for a large company, it can be very, very noisy to look for initial vectors. And we find it's more effective to try to find it at post-compromise. So if I'm trying to prevent an attack, I absolutely want to look at all the way to the left, right? Like I'm trying to block it at prevention and initial infection. But generally speaking, right, if I'm running a hunt, and like at least this is the way we kind of look at it, we kind of look at it as, look, we're going to assume compromise already. We're going to assume that's already been successful. So for that reason, we go not all the way to the right in the chain, but like right to the right enough that we're going to assume they've already been successful, collect intelligence on that for what we know they've used, and then look for that, and we're going to have a better chance of identifying that, whereas if we have too much noise, we might miss it, get a false sense of security, et cetera. So that's just, it's kind of it's a little bit of a minutia there in how we look at hunting, whereas, we might, for example, build a detection, if there's like a ton of push. But again, for an organization our size, right, that's kind of where you run into, trying to get, a good number of true positives versus false positives.
Guys, it's more of a TTP specific question. When you're looking for APT groups, how do you account for and counteract fast fluxing techniques throughout your hunting and detection process? So, like for example, use of wildcard A records to enumerate loads of subdomains.
I'm sorry, ask that one more time. I didn't fully get that.
Am I talking too fast? Sorry. How do you account for fast fluxing techniques throughout your hunting and detection process when you're looking for APT groups? So like Gameradon using wildcard A records to rotate through God knows how many subdomains. I'm just interested how you approach that.
So.
Yeah. We have a few ways we do that, and I'm trying to think what I can go into in this audience. It's obviously challenging when you have a super large scale, right? I've seen a number of a number of talks on that in the past. I think a lot of what we do in like the data science world for that. We actually have a data science team within our cybersecurity team that helps with that. Yeah, I don't think I have anything specific for that. I'm going to.
Hi, great talk. I wanted to ask about the retirement process for detections. How do you sell that to your leadership when they want to always be in the know of threats, right? But it's causing false positive because this is old data, and there's no point in having it.
So what I've found in the past is, and maybe I'm just lucky, leaders tend to care more about outcomes than they do about volumes of data. So, if you tell them that, I have to go retire a bunch of signatures, but it's actually going to improve the outcome, which is going to be, I'm going to be more effectively going to be able to, my SOC's going to be able to more effectively respond to alerts. They're going to be more likely to see, threat actor activity, and therefore I'm going to be able to more effectively protect the company from risk. That is that's generally better well received than, my metrics of number of signatures has gone down. And the reality is, it's very likely that if I retire a handful of signatures, I'm probably going to put a bunch of new ones in production anyway, because it's not like we haven't started working. So we have stopped working, rather. So it's going to level out. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yes, I was wondering in terms of metrics to show them that data, what are you looking at?
Oh, so metrics for retirement.
What metrics would you show them to show the benefit of retiring?
Oh. That's a good question because we actually haven't really presented that metric before. I'm kind of
that's
thinking.
something hand in hand with us too. So in the Intel space, we do also retire SOAPs, COPIs, TAPIs. Now, SOAPs are software. That's retired when a product is no longer in use. That's an easy one to explain. COPIs and TAPIs, that's metric driven. We retire them when we see a significant decrease or a canceling out of any activity of interest to us or our company. And then that can further help feed Jason in the retirement of detections when we back him up with that metric data saying, hey, look, we got these detections for this TAPI, but they're showing as inactive. We're not getting any new data or feeds on them for over a year now.
Yeah, I think the easiest way probably to answer that is that probably isn't actually a metric I would present directly, but it is what I would use to explain, like, the story behind other metrics, right? So if, incident count went down because this, well, that's, I'd explain that. But, that isn't a metrics we've typically presented before.
You mentioned TAPI and how that helps kind of prioritize hunts. I'd love for you to kind of talk about that a little bit more, and how often does a change in your understanding of threat actors and their change in priority on the intel side result in, like, hey, this changed, we need to do a hunt on that? Like, how can you describe that process?
Yeah, like all the time.
It's basically a daily basis.
That's BAU.
Yeah, it's a BAU process for us. We're always ingesting, obviously, reporting and the latest out there. And what we do is when we bring in the latest events that are occurring, like, for instance, the recent incidents in Vegas, that's mapped to TAPIs. So if that particular TAPI is of interest to us, it gets mapped to that. And then that gets passed on to our hunt team with all the latest data for them to trigger a hunt for. Like Jason said, my team keeps his team pretty busy and a nice backlog.
And that's typical, like I kind of said earlier, like we'll go meet with them and say, okay, so, they're more likely to, I mean, it's not like my team doesn't know what's happening in the world, but they're, they're following
it easier for them.
Yeah, so they're like, hey, this MGM thing, you've probably heard of it. Here's a bunch of, TTPs related to it. And they're like, all right, so this is going to detection, this is going to hunting. So it really, they kind of kick it off. They're kind of the initiation point in a lot of cases, and then we go from there.
All right, last call for questions. Gentlemen, wonderful presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hope to see you all at the keynote. Thank you very much for coming.